I had to really have honest conversations where I'm like, you scratched me.
Yeah.
God, you actually scratched me. And I did not like that. I didn't go to church for a season. I didn't know how to pray for a season. All of those things. And I'm like, I'm having to really honestly say, you hurt me.
On day 2 of that role, I promise you, everything that you could imagine to be toxic in a workplace, literally that was the space I was in. Add everything and you had this cocktail of wrong. And it was, for me, a big shake-up because I'm like, why am I here? God, you're the one who's supposed to order my steps. I've trusted you, I've put in time, I've confidently spoke up. I've done the things that, the Bible says to do when you're really believing and trusting in God, but I'm in this wilderness experience.
It was a way to process my emotions without sometimes what feels as sometimes the slight censorship of Christendom that kind of forces you to say, you have to say something this way. It is well, it is not well.
Faith doesn't always mean you're going to get clarity in the situation. So you sometimes think, okay, I'm going to pray about this. I'm going to do all the right steps and going to go to church, hear this sermon, and I'm going to get clarity. But there were days where I prayed and the next day was worse.
Thank you so much for being a part of our growing community. It honestly is just such an honour and such a dream to see how Magnify is growing. For anyone who's new to our channel, Magnify is a network, community and platform focused on empowering ambitious women of faith to thrive in our various spheres of influence.
And we know how important it is to have safe, honest, authentic conversations as women of faith. And so we want to provide a space to do that.
My name is Ruth and I'm the founder and CEO of Magnify.
And my name's Rachel and I'm part of Team Magnify. We'll be your hosts and we'll also be featuring guests each time.
So if you like our content, don't forget to like and subscribe and most importantly, share with a friend who you think would benefit.
So today on the Magnify podcast, we have with us Nasia Burke and Mary Adeyemi. Nasia is the EMEA Partnerships Lead for a leading ad tech company. She's previously been a client director at Kantar, where she helped the campaign strategy for accounts such as Adidas and Disney+. Outside of work, Nasia is a worship leader. Team Magnify love the joy with which she shares all of her interests and work. Mary is an award-winning investment professional with a long tenure working with investment banks. She is the CEO at Visibility, where she coaches female professionals to find joy and advancement in their careers. Mary has also got a debut book called Visible Strengths. We love how Mary continues to double down on her knowledge to help other female professionals. So it's so good to have you both with us today, ladies, and we're going to be talking about what do we do when we have a crisis of faith. So it would be great, first of all, Nasia, to hear from you. How did you actually come to faith?
Well, I was, I guess, one of these people who were born into a Christian family. So my parents have been pastors before I was born. Yeah. So I kind of was born with a tambourine in my hand, as I kind of say. And, I went through the motions of going to church, singing. If there's something that needed to be done, it was done. But I would say my relationship really kicked off when I was 18 after the death of sudden death of a friend that really shook up my perspective that tomorrow's not promised. So I don't want to be lukewarm anymore. And that's when I started developing my journey with God and faith. And it's been like a journey ever since then.
Yeah. So good. How about you, Mary?
Slightly similar, always basically grew up in a household of faith. My parents, not pastors, but, huge believers of Christ, very church going. But I grew up Catholic, which is interesting because sometimes I think people say, oh yeah, like you're Christian, but then I think people who are Catholics feel like they're like a little subset of that and sort of separate. And so that's how I grew up, doing mass and morning service and all of those things. And I one of the biggest elements of growing up for me was the fact that I am a product of faith. My parents waited 11 years before they had kids after they got married. And so when they had my brother and then I came after, it was always like, that was a big part of our life. Like you are actually the gift of like a long season of prayer. And so I grew up with that awareness. But probably maybe when I was at uni was when I really started exploring my own faith and not like going to church because mom's like, we have to go for morning mass at 6:30, but actually now thinking, what does the Bible say? And having like my own sort of God experiences. And then doing the altar call, I think maybe like I just graduated from uni or something like that. And I did like the whole like altar call, going to church, da, da, da. But it was a big moment for me because I invariably left the Catholic Church. I left the Catholic faith or sect, I would say. And I knew that that was a big thing for my parents and really was a cause of a lot of difficulty. But I would say that was probably the first time I felt as though I was making a decision, fully trusting in God and my own path and my own walk of faith without necessarily doing exactly what was my parents had brought me up to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and faith, so even for both of you, since you've come to faith, it's not a linear journey. So, no, we can all agree on that.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So, have there been any crisis points or moments where that have caused a struggle for you personally in your faith?
Yeah.
yes, the baseline is yes.
Yeah.
I think we can all vouch for that. I mean, whether it's in relationships, family health situations, friendships, my career. So if I was to pinpoint a moment where I felt like it was a wilderness experience, it would be after I decided, to switch up my career from strategy to project management. It seemed to be a real good fit for me. I'm queen of organization, implementation. So that's me. I invested time, money, told people really boldly and confidently, like, I'm going to do this and I'm doing this in faith. And, I qualified and then secured a role. And then on day 2 of that role, I promise you everything that you could imagine to be toxic in a workplace. Literally, that was the space I was in. So there was racial bias, sexual harassment, literally add everything and you had this cocktail of wrong. And it was for me a big shake-up because I'm like, why am I here? God, you're the one who's supposed to order my steps. I've trusted you. I've put in time. I've confidently spoke up. I've done the things that, the Bible says to do when you're really believing and trusting in God. But I'm in this wilderness experience. And in that period of time, it was, that's when I really experienced anxiety. I really experienced feeling alone because in my mind, it was like, well, loads of people don't like their job. So it's not anything new. Who might like, should I talk about this? So I cried a lot, a flood of tears. And the important part for me through that experience was understanding that faith doesn't always mean you're going to get clarity in the situation. So you sometimes think, okay, I'm going to pray about this. I'm going to do all the right steps and going to go to church, hear this sermon, and I'm going to get clarity. But there were days where I prayed and the next day was worse, And so I'm like really questioning, why am I here? God, I think you're supposed to be the one to order my steps. You've literally said that's what you would do. I just have to take the first step. And so the clarity actually came for me years and 2 roles after the situation. So it wasn't fun. It wasn't great. But sometimes I think that's the important thing with faith is to know that you may not have all the pieces of the puzzle at the time, but there will be clarity at some point down the line. And that was a crisis moment for me where I got to really explore and rebase my faith, I would say.
Yeah. How about you, Mary? Has there been anything in particular where, a particular crisis or something you've hit that's caused you to question faith?
Yeah, I mean, a big one was actually not that long ago, 2019. I suddenly lost my dad. And it was one of those seasons that I felt was a big transition season. I had just left a job that I'd been working for like maybe 11 years and I was doing very well, but I just knew that it was time to shake things up. So I'd made this big move. And 4 months into that role, my dad just passed away. And we were in the middle of planning his birthday, actually. So his birthday was like 10 days after. And he was just suddenly ill. And then he was gone in like a matter of hours. So that was just very, that was jarring for me.
Yeah.
And it happened at the start of the year, it happened in January. So it pretty much defined my entire 2019. I don't even know what happened in that year. Like it just, it defined everything. And that was a big one. That was a big one for me. And I think it made me question a lot of things, I lost it was weird. I lost sort of trust in God somewhat, but I also lost trust in myself. I lost trust in the words that I felt like God had told me, because over years I always imagined, my dad would be, walk me down the aisle. I had all these like images of things I would do with my dad, but like here I am now, like, but he's gone. So there were visions or pictures in my mind that clearly were never going to happen in real life now, because he's actually gone. And so I started thinking to myself, so what else am I standing on as a word from God, but it's just really a figment of my imagination? And that was a big thing, because I really had to start unwrapping and unraveling everything that I had believed, and think like, well, Dad's gone, so how do you know this is actually going to happen? Well, Dad's gone, so how do you know this is actually going to happen? So it was just, it was wild. I'd never been someone who had ever had anxiety, but, I would break down. I remember one day breaking down in the morning because I was trying to get to work, and I was looking for a specific pair of black jeans, and I just crumbled. And I just remember just thinking, I can't find the jeans, and this is the only thing I want to wear today. And I just crumbled, like, like in front of the closet. I just, but that was the anxiety, it was the grief, it was the overwhelm, it was all of that. But, I guess in there is like the moment of really, deconstructing, like, really, what do you believe, you know? And we read like chapters of the Bible, like Job, who lost everything, lost his family, lost his friends. And it feels like a story. And then when it's happening to you, you're thinking, hold on, like, this is a lot, and having to just navigate that. So, so not that long ago, and I feel as though I'm just kind of coming out of that season of feeling very sort of discombobulated, and questioning everything, but also still seeing God through the season. And feeling like you're coming out on the other side.
Yeah. And can I ask you, Mary, has that affected what you feel willing to have faith for now? So having that crisis of faith, do you feel nervous to expect things, or to trust maybe things in the Bible that you trusted before?
I think it's difficult to not say yes to that question, because I think that's just the reality. Things that happen to us, your hurts or whatever, shapes your worldview. And I think that was sort of one season. But then I think what I had to look to is that, in that time, I also feel like I really felt God's comfort. And I felt that, death is inevitable. Everybody is going to go through it. My dad lived a good life. I really had this weird sort of two things can be true situation, because I had a lot of gratitude, but I also had a lot of disappointment at the same time. But then through it all, like, the scripture where it says, like, all things work together for your good, it really comes to life, because you're thinking, like, despite everything, this might be challenging, this might be difficult, but you can sort of see this this thin line that's weaving through that sort of somewhat makes sense. And you still find things to be grateful for. I would sit down some days and all I would feel would just be intense pride. Like intense pride, like, oh wow, like that was my dad. He's awesome. Look at all the lives that he impacted. Look at all the things he taught me. Look at all the things, I would just sit and just think, I know he's gone, but I'm so grateful that he was my dad. And those are like silver lining moments, right? And so when you feel those, you come out and you think, okay, that was tough, but I feel as though I'm stronger for it. It could have been way worse. Just so many things you use to console yourself. But yeah, like definitely, they're just times where I'm like, I want to trust God for something. I'm going into a new season now. As we're talking about, I'm going into a new season now, and I know that somewhere in there is still that trust that, that might have happened before, but there's still that trust. And I had to really have honest conversations where I'm like, you scratched me. Yeah. God, you actually scratched me. And I did not like that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie about it. I didn't go to church for a season. I didn't, I didn't know how to pray for a season. All of those things. And I'm like, I'm having to really honestly say, you hurt me. And I didn't think you could hurt me like that.
Yeah.
And I'm disappointed in that, but we're going to continue on this journey. Let's go. Yeah.
It's beautiful to hear you talk about the tension of
Yeah.
the kind of the grief and the crisis with
yeah.
trust at the same time. And I just wonder for you, Nasia, in your career transition and believing this is the next step. I've been doing everything right. I've made the right choices. I'm using wisdom. You get there and you're like, what's going on? And even the fact that there wasn't an instant change overnight, it wasn't like everything fixed itself.
Yeah.
In terms of what you expected from God, has that changed since that point? Did it damage it for a time?
Absolutely. So for me, I've always had this, I guess, because of my upbringing, God is real and that's that. And I think that stemmed from seeing my parents being the same that they are at home, out behind the pulpit, and also seeing testimonies, right? Because testimonies, I see them as fuel to be like, okay, that person did it, went through it, got through it, so can I. And in that season for me, it was just sometimes blind faith. Like, I don't know what's going on, can't make heads or tails of it, but God, I trust you. I had to make peace with the fact that God is sovereign. So when I accept that, okay, in this life, we're going to have the pieces and answers sometimes, and sometimes we're not. Making peace with that, as someone who is chief organizer, I like to know where everything is at every given time. Making peace with that and relinquishing that control helped me really, I guess, reset. And it's actually like a burden lifted off because I don't have to worry about everything. And so in that season, as I said, it didn't make sense, but it made sense to roles after.
Yes.
It's because of that company where I was in the trenches, that brand stood out and made my CV stand out, and that got me the interview in the process. So it's like, okay, God, I see what you're doing. But it's like going back to what you said, and that is the scripture that roots me. It's like all things are working together for my good because I love God and I'm called according to his purpose. So even if I don't have, something that looks bad, it can be used for good. So I've made peace with that. And sometimes making peace with things that you can control and you can't helps you navigate your journey a little bit more with, I guess, you can breathe easily, more easily, knowing that.
So, Nasia, is there anything practical from that time where your present reality wasn't lining up with maybe what you felt God had said or what the Bible says? Is there anything practical you did to navigate that time?
Yeah, so definitely, as someone who's like a type A person, very direct, likes to have all the pieces together, you're always looking forward. I'm always looking forward. I'm always looking at where I am today and where God says I should be or what his word says. And that distance in between can sometimes be really daunting because you start to question yourself. You start to question if you're capable. But I think the thing that helps me is just breaking it down step by step. You may not have the faith to get you from A to B, but you could have the faith just for 8.1 for the next hour. And using the fact that grace is here, use a daily dose of it just to help you. If it's like, God, I'm about to do this presentation and I'm not prepared, but help me, cover me where I've kind of fallen short. It's those little incremental pieces in your faith that I think closes the gap. And some of the practical things I've done when you're like in the trenches, when I say like you're really deep in it, like the valley of the shadow of death, whatever you want to say, is really simple things like offsetting the negative voices that come to your head. So I will surround myself with those positive encouragers, the cheerleaders that are in your life. Talk to them, listen to positive news. Because if you turn on the news, you're going to hear something that is negative. Look for the stuff that is positive. And as a worship leader, worship is the way I express my love for God. And also it helps me reset my mind into who God is rather than the situation. Even silly things like getting a rush of endorphins. So my feed on social media is full of cats and dogs. Like every year is like, I'm not joking. So I will sometimes just look at that stuff to just numb my mind a little bit and take my focus and just have a rush of, I feel good, broken up the day a little bit. But I think, you have to just have grace for yourself as well. That self-care, because you may be in the warfare. But along the warfare, there might be battles that you're winning along the way. Celebrate those. Eat that tub of ice cream. Whatever it is, to just break up and celebrate where you're making progress can just help. Like, it's all about, as I say, the journey and enjoying that process. But when you're the gap in between, I think one thing that I always accept is now that there's going to be character building
Yeah.
because of it. So I'm going to be better for it.
Absolutely.
I don't like it. I really don't like it, but like the gym.
Yeah, you just keep
We
going.
keep going because
Yeah.
you know it's going to reap positive benefits in the end. So I think those were some of the things I would say.
And how about you, Mary? So in that really difficult few years you've had, have there been some practical things that you've used to navigate the time, even though it's been hard, when what your present reality is, losing your dad, you felt hasn't really lined up with like, okay, God, you've hurt me. You know, you say, God, you've scratched me. What kind of practical things?
I relied a lot on community at the time. My family lives in Nigeria, so I literally I was traveling to Nigeria for the weekend. Like I would just go home because I just knew that was
just to be with them.
Yeah, that was the place of comfort. I would just go home. Like every couple of weeks, I would just buy a ticket and go. And it just felt like, it was weird because, my dad passed in Nigeria. We did the funeral really quickly. I came back here. And it always seemed as though it wasn't real because I lived here. And so it was sort of a way of cope, of sort of facing it. Because every time I would go home, I would remember that he wasn't there. So it was like I just had to be in that environment to sort of also get myself out of the shock. And then I had lots of friends who rallied around me, who would come and stay over like sometimes during the week. They would just hang around and just make sure like I knew that they were there. They would pray with me, they would pray for me. They would bring the tissues, lots of tissues. At the time they would talk, they would talk with me, listen to me. I really relied on community a lot. I also actually did therapy for the first time. I had grief therapy, and that really helped. I didn't do too many sessions, but I was going every other week. And it was interesting because, these were not faith-based questions. There was no conversation about God. I didn't even know if my therapist even believed in it. We didn't even get into all of that. But I think invariably it was a way to process my emotions without sometimes what feels as sometimes the slight censorship of Christendom that kind of forces you to say, you have to say something this way. It is well. It is not well. Like right now, it is not well. Like I'm not feeling like it's well. I'm not really sure where it's going. And so I think just, if you were in church, it just felt like you had to do this thing, you had to do the whole worship thing, you had to do the whole clapping thing. And I was like, I don't want to do that. And I just felt like therapy was helpful to really help me process my thoughts, help me understand where I was in the whole thing. I remember my therapist actually asking me one question. I couldn't say the words, I lost my dad. I couldn't say it out loud. It was almost like every time I wanted to say it, I would literally like choke up and I would just start crying. I remember one day we got there in the end, maybe 6 weeks in, I was like, I lost my dad. I said it, and then she was like, okay. So what did you actually lose? And I'm like, I lost my dad. But she's like, yeah, that's the person you lost. But what did you lose? And that made me really pause. And, there's the person of, what I really lost was my biggest cheerleader. What I really lost was the person that I liked to talk to the most. What I really lost was, this, my somewhat, I guess, support system or, if anything went wrong, I just knew, I could call my dad. I could call him for advice. I could call him for anything. And so that's actually what I lost. And I really had to start, and one of the things was like, okay, so how can we help you slightly replace that? We can't replace the person, but we can sort of try to help you replace what you lost. So how do you figure out new support systems? How do you figure out other relationships that can maybe help bridge the gap? So that was really helpful for me. Prayer was out the window for me, really. I just couldn't do it. And I also just wasn't going to church. I couldn't be in that environment, I don't think. And so I would just play like worship music, Maverick City, or, at the time I used to listen to a lot of Hillsong. They had some really cool albums. I had to listen to a lot of Hillsong. And I would just, stay there. Probably wasn't singing along, but I would just stay in that space. And I think for me, it was the logical part of me is saying, you might not feel like it, but you know that this is what you need to get out of this to help you get here.
Yeah.
The truth is you don't feel like it, but you know enough about, like, deep down in all of this, you know that God is real. You know that God is for you. You know you're going to come out on the other side. And you know that the way to get out of this depression is to stay in the place of worship. So you may not feel like it, but just do it.
Yeah.
So it was almost a very mechanical thing. I would just wake up and press play, and then we go. But I wasn't feeling like it. I wasn't lifting up holy hand. I wasn't doing anything. I was just like, this is just what I need to do, and I'll just, hopefully it would help. And yeah, like phases. So yes, definitely community worship, therapy was really helpful, I would say, through that. Yeah. And then eventually, like, reading scripture. Like reading the Bible, just sit down and actually read, and scriptures will come. Or I used to do a lot of YouVersion, like devotionals on grief. And I would just sit and read and just understand that the feeling I was having is not unique to me. I wasn't going mad. I was experiencing something that was real and raw, and it's common to everyone. And, you don't beat yourself up for feeling like this. And I feel actually in that season, I didn't like speaking to my mom. I knew she needed me, and I would always do the whole, like, I need you thing, but I didn't feel my emotions were safe with her, which is a really big thing to say. But I just felt as though, like, she's like, my mom is like, this is God, sovereign God. We don't question God. This is it. And I felt like my own emotions were unsafe there. Because I'm like, I don't think that by questioning God, I'm saying I'm losing faith. I think those two things can coexist. But that's not the way my mom handles faith. She's all about, this happened, this is good that it happened now because something else could have happened. And I'm like, why are you thinking about things in that? It's random. But for me, it was like, no, I really want to think through this, knowing that God is God. But I'm trying to figure this out. And I'm trying to work through that. And I didn't feel as though I wanted to. There were just certain people who you would ordinarily think I should be talking to, but I just was not. Because I was like, I don't want to leave that conversation feeling like I can't actually be honest about my emotions. And so, and the weirdest people will show up in the season. Like, people that were not even, maybe had not even been that close in my life in the years before, but God just brought them around me in that season to help, right? And I also remember, like, maybe a few months after, or maybe like 9 months after, another friend of mine lost her dad, and I was her first phone call. And it's amazing because you just think like the very thing that can break you is the very thing that God will use as the whatever, And I remember her calling me, and maybe she called me for whatever reason. I just knew that something had happened because it's not a regular phone call. So when I picked up the phone and she was like crying, I just lost my dad. I was like, right. There's seasons you go through that God would definitely use as the testimony on the other side, or like, the encouragement for someone else. So those are the kind of things that I think I relied on in that season.
And so you've kind of spoken about a bit of a stigma attached to difficulties in faith and a faith crisis. Nasia, did you experience that at all, even just personally?
Yeah, I felt like I have a similar kind of understanding, because especially having parents that are pastors, their faith is, even in the middle of the storm, you're going to be rock. And I'm like, well, I'm a delicate flower. I understand. And so I had to grapple with, my emotions and my faith. And even going back to what you were saying, is sometimes that mustard seed faith is enough. It's sufficient. So even if you're feeling like, I just don't feel good, I'm not okay, it's all right to tell God that. We don't have to hide our emotions. He can see that already. So at the stage I'm at now, I'll be like, okay, God, this doesn't look good. I'm not happy the way this situation is. I don't know how to navigate it, take it off. But then also saying things where it, I guess, coincide with my faith, but I know that you can do it. I know that you can sort this out. And so the stigma, I think it's a little bit dangerous because it can put others off. Those that you want to share your faith with, they need to see us as real, because we are real, and we do go through those same emotions that everybody does go through. And the fact that I think we sometimes glaze over this, that one of the fruits of the Spirit is long suffering. And I'm thinking, why is that there? Why is it there? Because if we thought life wouldn't wind us, we wouldn't need that ability to suffer long and endure and build up that resilience. So I think we have to get real with the fact that we're not going to feel good in the season. We're not going to have always the time to read the word, because it's just not penetrating at that time, but balancing it with what you truly do believe and what you can say at that time. And if it's the mustard seed faith that's going to get you through it, I think that's fine. Start there.
Yeah. And what beauty has come out of this season? What beauty has come out of this time for you? What's been developed in you that you come away and you're saying, my faith has actually been strengthened because of that crisis point?
Yeah, I think absolutely. One thing I've realized, or in that season specifically, is that these trials, these tribulations are there to build us for what's coming next. Because if we didn't go through anything, if I didn't go through that during the pandemic, I would have crumbled, because I, again, went through another shaking in my career where it's like, we're going to have to let go of like almost half the company. But I'm like, okay, God, you've sustained me through hard times before in my job. You can do this now. So just having a point of reference, having a track record with God, my personal experience, not someone else's, I think has fortified my faith. And when it comes to expectations, I now expect big things from God. I started off this year saying, God, I want you to blow my mind. Previous years, I would be like, God, I want in this area you to do X, Y, Z. And in this area, do X, Y, Z. In my fitness, do X, Y, Z. All of these things. But now I've, as I said, relinquished that control to be like, your plan's going to be better than mine anyway. So I'm just run with it. But just blow my mind. That's all I'm asking you to do. So I think my expectations have increased. And my relationship with God is a bit more raw. I'm more real with him. I don't have to do any pretense, because what's the point? He already knows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and sometimes you just have to. I remember like driving one day and literally shouting. Like I just felt so overwhelmed, and I was shouting, "Get away from me! I am a child of God." Like it was just one of those like weird moments. I just genuinely felt like my faith was slipping away, you know, and I was just like, I am a child of God. Like, and I was shouting in the car. I was like, I'm a child of God. Like, I was just like shouting, because I was like, I had to just enforce that. Like, hey, no, I feel how I feel, but I know what I know.
Exactly.
And I'm going to stick to that. So let's so all these thoughts, all these things. And I think it was one of those days where I was driving and you can almost hear these things almost saying like, just drive off. Like, just do something that you're going to basically harm yourself. Just drive off. And you're just like, 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 I used to think, I used to have a lot of dreams about my dad. And so I then used to look forward to those dreams. I used to look forward. So almost like I lived to like, And then I would process information about like, actually, it wouldn't be so bad to like, let me just go and hang out with him more permanently. And it's weird because I didn't really feel, they were not suicidal thoughts. They were not, I don't think they were that, because I was not reaching for anything. I wasn't trying to harm myself. I wasn't any of that. But I just felt as though I wanted to spend more time with him. I felt like I didn't enjoy being like awake as much as I did being asleep, you know. But those are the foundations of what could have eventually developed into a real problem, you know? Those are the foundations. I remember just having to just stop and say, no, let go of me. Like, I am, you know, I know, I feel how I feel, but I know what I know. I'm a child of God. God has what's best for me. This season might be difficult, but God will see me through. You know, there are footprints in the sand. You know, with their footprints in the sand, and you're just going to keep on walking in those footprints, and that's it. There's no, you know, and I think that was, for me, the reality of the experience. Like, it became really dark. And in all of that, I'm still going to work. I'm still doing, like, I'm still showing up. Like, I actually seemingly normal. But you know that every day you're just like, wow. Like, so those are, and I think sometimes, I think that would be my encouragement is, feel how you feel, but know what you know. Stick to that. Don't let the emotions become so tangible that it replaces what is your actual knowledge of God in this difficult season.
Yeah.
Yeah, because emotions, they are fleeting.
Yeah.
Exactly what I was going to say, they're fleeting. So what you know is like the truth isn't subject to change, facts are.
Yeah.
And the fact is, I feel down. The fact is, nothing's good, but your truth will remain to you. That's what anchors you. And I think we have to get I don't like it because we preach soft life. People talk about soft life and having that, no struggles or anything, but we have to get comfortable in being uncomfortable. Because God said He's our helper or He's our comforter, but that doesn't mean you're always going to feel comfortable. Sometimes the next level or progress requires exactly. So when you are, sometimes now I get excited, like, okay, something's feeling a bit shaky here. I'm expecting that something's good has to come out of this. It has to, right? Because otherwise, why am I going through this?
I think just my big takeaway from this conversation today has been there will be points where we all have difficulties, right? We're all going to have a crisis at some point, and perhaps that will also affect our faith if we're women of faith. But it doesn't necessarily have to crush us. We might even deconstruct for a time, but the ability to reconstruct and understand why we believe what we believe and why we think what we think is so crucial. And there's real beauty also to come from difficult and hard times, resilience. And there definitely doesn't need to be a stigma attached. Because we need to be free to remember we're also human as we're on this journey too.